Good afternoon, X Winterview, back for another dialogue for his dear friend Annastacey. This dialogue is a very tricky one. I'm going to try my best to describe the indescribable. Such is my talent at describing stuff. This subject tries to give a sense of the delineations between self, consciousness, beyond consciousness, God, beyond God, nothingness, and so forth. How to start? Very difficult topic. To begin, we start with the self. The self, as we experience it, is that sense that I personally exist. My existence is independent from the rest of experience. I am the observer, if you like, of stuff happening in the universe. Me inside my body and everything else outside. That's a very brief and generic description that suffices. We then discover that perhaps I'm not that self that exists conceptually inside a body. We perhaps discover, moreover, that I am the aware, awake presence rather than their body particularly. This understanding, as it is an understanding, tends to relieve a bit of the pressure, so to speak, from the apparent limitations of being a separate, independent self inside a body. But it's not the full story. Some religious traditions describe a thing or entity or deity, if you like, which we'll just call God. God is said to exist separate from the individual, usually in heaven, or somewhere heavenly, and they are generally conceptualized to be powerful, benevolent, all good stuff. The sense for the individual with this idea of God as separate somewhere else is that the individual must somehow learn to experience God, or perhaps pray to God, appease God, to do good stuff for God in order to receive good stuff back from God. This, in essence, is the basis for quite a lot of the way the world works, at least in the general religious sense, that me here and God over there, and somewhere in between we meet occasionally. Experiences that are felt as pleasant or transcendent or even somewhat mystical can be conceptualized as the self, personal self that is, being rewarded or touching the divine in some way. Tuning into the divine, you might even say. As the spiritual journey, the apparent spiritual journey progresses, the sense of self, identity, personal self in the body tends to fall away somewhat, disintegrate, and be more identified or aligned with that more impersonal awareness or consciousness, you might say. It then seems that God that we imagined to be somewhere else, over in heaven, looking down on us, smiling or frowning on our behavior, seems to be part of that very experience embedded within everything that is manifested. God in the machine, more than God standing back and operating the machine. This is we might call this a more advanced state of awareness, or just a better model, perhaps, if you like. And it seems that this brings subjective feelings of peace and relief often to discover this, that God is in the cars, and God is in the hills, and God is in the people, and God is basically in everything. As awareness of this progressively deepens and unfolds further. This is just a story, by the way, not a literal description. It seems that it's realized eventually that God is the totality of experience, and that is only realized, or it's only possible to realize that, as the sense of personal awareness falls away. It's like they're mutually exclusive, you could say. The sense of God as consciousness and personal self just cannot exist in the same room. So no one ever experiences God as consciousness. All there is, in that moment, you might say, is consciousness. Or all there is God. And that seems to be a very elevated, quite lofty understanding or realization. It seems like it might be the final understanding or realization that there is no personal me. It's just God as consciousness. So, this is not the end game, amazingly, although it does seem like it. To go beyond this divine consciousness seems a bit strange, because the natural question is, who would indeed go beyond this God consciousness if there is no individual? Good question. What is realized immediately as well, when this is realized, is that there never was an individual in the first place. It was an appearance. So in a way, the individual never went anywhere, having not existed. The best that language can come up with, really, is that God is realizing God, which is pretty difficult to wrap your mind around, in all honesty. But this realization of God as consciousness itself, the totality of experience, is, or can be, superseded by a deeper, you might say, understanding or revelation, the total dissolution of self, the sense of self, one's very existence as consciousness is seen through, and it is realized that everything is an appearance, a dream, occurring, or hard to say this one, a stillness, a silence that exists prior to consciousness. Sometimes this is referred to in spiritual literature as Godhead, that ever-present stillness, full stillness, you might say even, that is never come or gone, never will come or go, has no beginning, has no end, ever-present life, that I am. What a marvelous discovery that one was never born and one will never die. This is the ultimate realization in a way. Ultimate understanding, you could say. The word understanding somehow fits this. No one can do this. No one can achieve this. The appearance of a person who was seeking this was not done by that person, that apparent person. That apparent person who was seeking Godhead was just a movement of that energy, you might say, that God consciousness energy within Godhead, stillness itself. Just like a dream. A dream is the best way I can think to describe that. There's no way to articulate Godhead or that prior to God consciousness. It has no objective qualities to speak of. It's you could say ever-presence and ever-knowing awakeness of some description, but at the end of the day, whatever you call it, doesn't really make a difference. Describing it accurately is not important. It won't help one realize this any more than nonsense words would help. Would hinder, sorry. So, it is absolutely indescribable. All description appears within it and falls away. Creation and destruction of the universe appears instantly, in a timeless instant, within the Godhead, so to speak. I, that core I, the sense of, not the sense of self, but just the I of existence, the I of consciousness, maybe, even, is that eternal I-ness. Ha! No word for it. Told you I was going to describe the indescribable. I'm doing a terrible job, probably. Describes the where was I? The I of consciousness. As some people have called it, the I of the I is perhaps what the seeker is always looking towards, always seeking, but can't find, of course. The seeker appears out of that unfurling creation and destruction in the instant. It has no solid, independent substance. It has no temporal qualities. It appears as if time exists, but it doesn't at all. There is absolutely no time. The final realization of the Godhead is timeless. It doesn't happen to a person in time. It can't be said that I realized Godhead God, that sounds weird, doesn't it? I realized Godhead yesterday. That would not make sense at all. You might get away with the description from the dream state of it seemed that a person realized the Godhead yesterday, but it's because we're talking about something that's more like a dream, you can see that any description is problematic or a bit of so what at the end of the day. So, getting back to the seeker, the apparent dilemma for the person who seeks Godhead is that they will never find Godhead, because the I of the seeker is that Godhead. The seeker themselves as consciousness, as God consciousness, as a manifestation, has no substance, has no form, has no independent reality from God consciousness. It's like a rolling, swirling wave that crashes and then dissolves back into the ocean. In that rolling, crashing instant, which imagine if we slowed down a video of a wave, we slowed it right down to watch the wave crash over the period of 80 years, like a human lifespan. This very slow wave, we would say, it looks like a wave crashing down very, very slowly, and then the wave disappears. But it was just the ocean at all times, never apart from the ocean, just an appearance in the ocean for a brief flicker in eternity. It looked like a person, acted like a person, did person-looking stuff for 80 years, and then was gone. But really was never gone, because it was never really there in the first place. It was just an appearance. That's the best I can do, I'm afraid, Annastacey, on the subject of describing the indescribable core essence of existence. I hope I've made it a little bit more clear. You can see, if I think back to scriptures and stuff, references are made in different religions to this realization. The most striking one that I think of, is from the Christian tradition, where I think it was Jesus, I'm not sure, who was going to talk about destroying a temple and then rebuilding it. Something like that. It struck me, though, the words perhaps pointing to the collapse, the utter collapse of the person, and reappearing as the infinite Godhead, so to speak. Remembering that, as I say this, it's just a story that points towards an experience that cannot really be described. Well, I did my best. This has been X Winterview with another brief dialogue. This time he tackled the indescribable. Hopefully he did okay. comments and questions are very welcome. Signing off.